Well, hey guys, welcome into The Next Man Up. I'm Mark Stanifer. John Gregory is with me again today, and we are both honored to be with you for another episode. Hey, if you want to connect with us, our email address is feedback@thenextmanup.com. We're on Facebook at NMU Journey, and the website is thenextmanup.com. However you prefer to engage with us, we encourage and look forward to you doing so. Hey, John, good to see you, man.
Good to see you. How's it going?
It's going, man. It's going.
Fantastic.
What do I say after that? That's kind of one of those awkward moments, right? Like what,
Well, because I left you hanging because usually I got something,
you do usually
to
have
throw out
something
there, and I'm just like, I ain't got nothing today.
Okay.
Sorry.
I got something for you.
I can make something up. Would you like me to make something
No,
up?
I got something for you that'll take us right into this crazy topic today. So it is fall, early fall, and schools are going back or they're back in session, and both the primary education as well as secondary education, higher ed, and I can imagine the discussions that happened up to this point on, well, what classes are you going to take and how are you progressing toward your degree and thinking more about college here in this context. And I can picture one of my kids coming to me and saying, Dad, I want to take a class called Angry White Men. And I'm like, what? You want to do what?
That's a thing?
That's a thing? And I can, you know me, I tend to be kind of even keeled and pretty reserved, but I have a feeling that I would sit forward, lean forward, even maybe stand up with a little bit of energy if one of my kids were to say, I want to take a class on Angry White Men. I'd be like, okay, first of all, that's a thing. And why is that a thing? Second of all, what are you going to do with that? Like, how does that help you progress to where you want to go? So it's a thing.
It is a thing.
It's a thing. When you hear that it's a thing at the collegiate level, at least for one university, what's your reaction?
Well, it's probably not as strong as yours because I don't have kids to worry about. Are they going to, choose that as their class for this fall? But I honestly had to sit back and like, what do we talk? What? I don't quite, what? And it shows how much I've been paying attention for, I guess, the last decade. But it's like I need to look into this because I'm not sure what this class is about. And I did a little bit, but yeah, that would be my initial reaction. What is this about?
What day is this April 1st? This has got to be a joke, right? You're pulling my leg. This, yeah.
You get credit for this? You're going to pay to go to that class?
Right. Yeah, see, you could feel it. You can.
Oh, I could. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
If I were in your shoes, I would be probably a little more inquisitive. With some anger potentially.
Right. Which is ironic, right?
Sure.
So this is a thing, and I have never positioned myself as culturally on the edge or culturally like uber aware. I'm paying attention, but like I'm not in the know. So I've seen some recent articles, as in like the last couple of weeks, although this class first came to attention like 2 or 3 years ago. It got some attention. And so It's the University of Kansas, and their class is called Angry White Male Studies. And just for the benefit of the listeners, and maybe this is where we lose everybody with this episode, but the description
it does sort of feel out of the norm for us. Let's be honest.
Yes, but
we're going somewhere.
We're going somewhere. So bear with us. So the description says, The students will employ interdisciplinary perspectives to examine how both dominant and subordinate masculinities are represented and experienced in cultures undergoing periods of rapid change. Okay. Connected to modernity, as well as to rights-based movements of women, people of color, homosexuals, and trans individuals. And so, based on that context, I'm starting to maybe see where this class could fit in today. I'm still a little dubious about its value, but I'm starting to see where it could fit. And then the description goes on with this. The questions that will be answered are, where does this angry male come from? What is he angry about? Is his anger misplaced? Is he blaming the right people? How long has this been going on? And is this a global phenomenon? And how do we move forward? So I'm still, like I said, dubious of the real value of this at the college level. If it were one of my kids, I don't know how this, although it fits kind of in the history as well as parallel in the gender studies tracks within the university. It doesn't feel very practical to me. But when you start to look at some of the questions that are being asked, it's hard to just dismiss those as questions that are irrelevant. And I think you feel the same. I see you kind of shaking your head.
I believe so. If I'm not a huge sociologist, but the few books that I've read by sociologists, I think this certainly fits in that realm and academic study curriculum. So it makes sense. It's just the title of the class is so jolting.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, when you see these questions and the content they're going to be looking at, then whether you want to admit it or this is my opinion, whether you want to admit it or not, the students are engaging on these questions anyway, to some degree, on their own or with each other or online, whatever. So it needs to be a little credence given to the sociologist department who says, well, let's give them a space and let's address this academically. That's my viewpoint on the content of the class. We don't have the fortune of being able to view it and see how it goes.
Right.
That it makes sense to me a little more beyond just the title of the class.
Yeah, and you're right that we don't have visibility into how the class will treat these topics. Another way to say it is, will there be a bias in the class itself as it's presented by the professor? And you and I both don't want to take us down a political lane here, although everything seems to be politicized. But on one hand, there is a lot of conversation, particularly over the last few years, maybe over the last decade, using the word rage. It used to be just like road rage, but now it's like we're outraged. That's the word. We're outraged at this. We're outraged at that. And a lot of it revolves around political topics on both sides. But we have this ongoing context of outrage about something. On the other hand, we also know men struggle with anger, and anger in the broader picture of struggling with emotions. And so you have this culture that is really talking about and feeling outrage. Maybe some of it's misplaced and misguided, and maybe some of it is really legit. And then you've got men that are struggling to deal with these strong emotions, including anger. And it is interesting that at this point in time, it's coming together in a class that's asking really some good questions, like, is the anger misplaced? Who's the target for the blame? Or the description that really caught my attention was, they didn't say it this way, but how do guys deal with change? How are we dealing with this process of change and modernity? And maybe in the context, last thought, and I'll let you respond, John, in the context of what we're doing here, what's the place for the male? What is the male to do? What is the male's purpose and responsibility? Like, these are bigger questions that in many ways we've asked and answered over and over and over on this show. And here we are coming at it once again, but from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, and in looking again, I'm even more in the dark than you are I don't keep up to snuff as much. But I'm like, all right, we're going to be talking about this. I should try to educate myself to some degree, give my own give myself my own class. So I came across a couple of authors and some articles online that gave me a more perspective back to that whole change thing. And what I gleaned from looking at that, one of those is a sociologist named Michael Hamill. What I gleaned from looking at a couple of his like descriptors of books he's written, one is called Angry White Men,
Yeah.
is the shift, particularly that's happened in the last 10 years, that is a lot of change that typical white males in America are really having a hard time adapting to. And he lists several things. It may be their involvement in education is not as much as it used to be. And so he threw out percentages of that. Maybe their acceptance of certain shifts in the political lanes. Again, we're not going to go into those, but just shifts that they thought they knew. This is not unlike identity stuff we've talked about in the past as well, but they thought they knew their place, and either they realized it's not in existence anymore, or they're full of fear because it's being changed and they don't have any control about it. So there's some explanations there for the anger. Does it justify actions that get carried out? No. It explains it a little bit, and it gives us the opportunity, from my viewpoint, it gives us the opportunity to just narrow this down to a sense of whatever we're angry about. What do we do with our anger? And identify not so much, I'm pissed off at so-and-so anchor on Fox or the other one, CNN, whichever one I'm opposed to, okay, da, 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 da. You can't do squat about Washington. Let's just be honest. How do I work that down? What am I really angry about? That's where my brain goes with all of this. And if you are feeling out of control or fearful, let's deal with that. What's the stuff you can actually do something about?
So hearing you say that prompts me to recall the aha moment that I had with emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, EQ. Because for a long time, I'm like, EQ is just managing outbursts. If I don't have that anger outburst, then I got it. And as I started to realize that that's more of a personality response to emotions than it is an intelligence response to emotions, what really clicked for me was when I understood emotions are data to be understood, to be read, to signals is another way to say it.
Yes.
And so as you're talking about the getting behind the anger, it reminds me that anger can be like any of the other emotions. It can be a signal for us. And if we're willing to stop and pay attention to the signal, then there's insight into what's behind it. Another way to say it is it's a symptom of some deeper cause. And instead of treating the symptom or not, as is often the case, right? Just ignoring and suppressing the symptom until it forces itself to be treated, we can get behind the symptom and get to that root cause, which it's my way, I think, of saying what you're suggesting. Let's narrow this down and get to why are you angry, and then what do you do about it?
Yeah, because the reality is this class could be called angry, fill in the next two words however you want. Whatever the color of the race, and whether it's male or female, you could offer a class on any, because all of us have issues that we're angry about. If we allow ourselves to sit in them and focus on them, and that be our, this is what I'm focused on. Uh, Let your mind wander, the angry, again, you fill in the blanks. It's not hard to imagine what the content would be about, but all of just us as humans, we're better going to be served to figure out how to deal with where's that anger come from myself? How is that impacting my family, my workplace, my neighborhood? And what do I need to do about that instead of just feeding that anger? There's nothing scriptural about feeding my anger.
So say a little bit more. What's an example as it comes to mind with feeding the anger?
Well, immediately two things come to my mind. One is, and this is going to sound like my own little rage moment here, but the if all I do, and this sounded like a real huge generalization, but if I just feed myself the same content about whatever it is I'm angry about, politics is easy to pick on, but if I'm just going to feed myself Fox News all day, CNN News all day, and just it just comes in, that's feeding that anger in my mind. If I'm focused on one particular social agenda, I'm not going to say one because I don't want to steer us off track here.
Right, fill in your own blank.
Yeah, fill in your blank there. And I'm so adamant that I'm right and everyone else is so stinking wrong. And I'm just going to let that drive me. Well, isn't that what's happening in our world? I'm reminded as I thought about this. I'm sorry if I mess up his name and state he represents, but I believe it's Senator Sassy from Arizona. I read his book a couple years ago called Them. Everything in that book was about, in a sense, the anger on either side of whatever topic you want to bring up and how we point the finger across the aisle and we're not doing anything to reflect on ourselves. And this is what I think all of this brings up to me is, all right, can we pull that back? I'm in agreement with him. Can we pull that back and find out what is it I'm really angry about and what is it I can really do something about? And if I can't do something about a certain item, how do I let that go? How do I trust in God really about that thing and reduce my anger and stop feeding it so much?
Okay, so let me take it a little bit further, but in a different direction, because much of our audience, I'm sure, is of the Christian persuasion or Jesus friendly is how I often like to say it. And guys we're often in the current expression of Western Christianity. We're often encouraged to not show strong emotion. And it's like our anger doesn't have a place. Or we just look at Jesus flipping tables over and say, like, that's the only really, like, the righteous expression, the righteous indignation, like that's really all there is. And yet, as you were talking, John, what comes to mind is when James writes about anger, he doesn't tell his audience, which included and was probably predominantly male given the context of the writing.
Right.
He doesn't tell them, don't be angry. He just says, don't let that anger run the table.
That's right.
It's okay to be angry because we as humans, we as men, engage in the full spectrum of emotions if we are willing to admit it. But like any other emotion, don't let it overrun you and have control in your response.
No doubt. And when I was thinking about this earlier today, I'd like to think of biblical characters and who did it well and who screwed up. And this one's easy to find. But uh, the guy that immediately comes to my mind is Moses.
Mm,
And more than once, he shows us he had anger issues more than once. And what you just said, he had justified anger in just about every moment that he was angry.
yeah,
It was justified. It's just what he did with it. If it leads to murder, probably not the thing to do, right? Or if it leads to just flat out disobedience of what God told you to do, yeah, anger's out of control.
yeah,
So I'm totally with you. It's not you're supposed to be emotionless. God didn't create us to be emotionless, but he did create us, excuse me, he did give us the Holy Spirit to help us regulate that to where we are not going against what we should be putting the image of God out as, and putting out a different image and hurting people, including ourselves.
yeah. When you say that, I'm picturing maybe some of the scenarios behind where that anger surfaces, the context, and like to use Moses's example, he was a Hebrew and he was watching his fellow Hebrew people be abused by the authorities of Egypt. And so, on one hand, you could argue that anger was justified.
Sure.
There was an injustice here that got him riled up. The problem is he didn't harness it into a beneficial act. He harnessed it into a very selfish act, really. And then fast forward to he's standing in front of the Pharaoh at the time, representing being obedient to what he was told to do and representing Yahweh, the God who is, to this Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's not cooperating. And the situation gets hard. And the people that he's trying to represent are turning against him, and the situation gets even more difficult. And so I can see him in the moment of like, hold on a sec. I am doing what you wanted me to do, and this is not playing out the way I thought. So on one hand, you've got the justifiable anger for the injustice, and on the other hand, in this situation, you've got anger for the way things are playing out that are different than you thought, or maybe more difficult than you thought. Obviously, Moses has very specific and unique circumstances, but I think in both of those cases, that will apply to many of the guys that are listening. It's justifiable, and at the same time, it's really sourced from a disconnect between how I thought things were going to play out and how they're really playing out, back to what's behind the anger, and using the anger as a signal to investigate.
Sticking with the Moses theme here for a second. If I could personally assess it down, it's going to be fun to talk to him in heaven, by the way.
Those are going to be some long, good conversations, right?
Yeah, because I'm like, Moses, dude, we have so much in common. At least I think we do. But I think you can boil it down to lack of control. There may be other ways to describe it, and a scholar may do better than me, but I think you boil it down to lack of control. That I thought I understood this, and it's not going this way, and I can't do a dang thing about it. And my hands are just up in the air. Like, what the heck is going on here? And the later scene when he's leading these, a couple million people, and they're so driving him crazy, and God tells him to do one thing, and he's like, no, I'm just going to do it my way. Well, what is that about? Well, it's like, I'm sick and tired of doing this, and I'm sick and tired of not being in control and being able to keep things the way they should be. And certainly, I think American men, maybe even more pointed Christian American men, can find ourselves in that same emotional space. And if we find ourselves in that way, looking at the country or our church community, whatever it is, that it's bigger than just our home, we got to be really careful about how we let that infiltrate our home. And it starts by what we're allowing infiltrate our heart. That's my view.
Back to feeding it, right? What is feeding us or feeding that anger?
Mm-hmm. So if you feel like this might probably be a good exercise, who's more in control here? Is it me or God? That's a fair question. It's not a nice question for yourself, because then you got to be honest. But, when you find yourself honestly answering, you looking in the mirror and saying, truth is, I'm more in control here, or I'm trying to keep control, and I'm out of control. I don't have the ability to do that. Then what do I do with that? If I don't know what to do with that, then I need to get someone to help me figure out what to do with this. One of the best questions I've been asked by a counselor, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the best counseling question I ever got from a counselor I was working with a couple years ago now, we weren't even talking about anger. And just almost like a fastball coming at me that I didn't see coming. He's like, John, what are you going to do with your anger? That's all I needed. I still remember that question, because it was the exact question I needed to hear. It had nothing to do with all the people I was screaming about and what actions they were doing. It was about how I was responding to the events going on around me. And all he saw was an angry person sitting across the room from him. He didn't say it. He just went straight in. What are you going to do with your anger? And I walked out of like, okay, challenge accepted. I was ready to hear that.
Right. One of the ways that we often define manhood is through strength. And it's often reduced to physical strength, size, muscles, fitness, that type of thing. And you and I were conversing not an hour ago with a guest that will make his way onto an episode down the road about thinking bigger than that limited expression of manhood, in this case, strength, as being physically strong, to being strong in character and strong in your relationship with God and strong in your emotional regulation and self-awareness, as well as self-control. And so when we talk about what it means to be strong, it's not don't get angry. It's not don't feel the feels. It is exercise some of your agency and your strength toward an intentional, purposeful response to that emotion, rather than a reaction and just a surrender to that feeling, such that somebody across the room can read you like a book and say, what are you going to do with that anger? Like, that is growing in strength, growing deeper in what it means to be a man, a healthy and a godly man who is in full touch with emotion and in full control at the same time. Now that's an ideal. That may be a bar that we never hit perfectly, consistently on this side, but that doesn't mean it's not a worthy goal. And in fact, as I was thinking about like maybe this isn't the right word, but like an antidote to the problem. If we have a problem of angry white males, what's the antidote? let's give ourselves a higher calling, a bigger ideal, a more expansive vision of who we are supposed to be individually, who we are supposed to be as males and as men. And let's go for that. Let's not settle for just the angry outbursts or the outrage. Let's reach for something bigger. And again, being strong here is part of how that can happen.
I just remembered, I think I saw this on Facebook. Sometimes I get sucked in. And I think it was a reel on Facebook where there was these two dogs, and there was a fence that you couldn't see the person doing it, but it was on wheels, and the dogs were on either side of it. And as long as the fence was between them, the two dogs were growling and barking and just out of control, looking like they are vicious dogs. They rolled the fence away, total silence.
Mm.
It was crazy. Back and forth. They kept doing that. They probably did it 4 or 5 times. The dogs did the same behavior. So every time there was a division between the two of them, they let their anger fly. When it was taken away, they showed calmness, and like they weren't even bothered by the presence of the other dog. It was crazy. And it just makes me think here, like, regulation is possible. If all I'm doing is staring at the fence and not looking at the sacredness of the creation on the other side of the fence, no wonder it's so easy to just bark at the fence.
Yep.
I'm not really barking. I mean, maybe I think I am, but I'm not really barking at the dog on the other side. This division is keeping us from doing what God wants us to do, and that is accept the image that He's created both of us in, and be working toward the love that we should have for Him first, and that naturally is going to flow for each other. But if we keep these fences between us, all right, then we're going to keep yelling at each other on Facebook, wherever.
Yep.
And not doing a whole lot of good.
I was doing some work on a water heater not too long ago, and had to release some of the pressure that naturally builds up in the tank in order to do what I was trying to do. And I'm thinking about any other type of container that develops pressure. It has a safety mechanism, or it should, if it's working properly, a safety mechanism, a safety valve to release that pressure. And I love the analogy of the dogs. I'm also thinking there may not be a scenario where the fence can be moved.
Right.
And what do we do with that? Where is that safety valve we have to release some of this, to let it out, to let it go in a way that doesn't either diminish it or let it take over us. But we've got that outlet for it. You know, maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a batting cage, maybe it's a driving range, maybe it's a buddy, you know, maybe it's some show that's kind of like that, that show that just lets you unwind. Whatever it is, it's totally okay to release some of that pressure in a healthy way. Otherwise, it's going to come out. It will come out at some point, and unless you can control it and regulate it, it's going to come out, and it's going to be at best, it's going to be not beneficial. At worst, it's going to be destructive and harmful when it does blow.
And I'm going to add a thought in here that probably wouldn't come to my mind outside of this conversation, but it's been valid to me. One safety valve you could create quite easily, I think you could, is to ask one of your buddies to, when you need, to call and be a 5-minute blow off, you know, kind of venting, like, I just need 5 minutes. Just, I don't need you to say anything. Just give me the space and I'm done. I think that could be, it's not the best solution, but it is one of the tools you could add to your toolbox. And that could actually be potentially a way for two dogs to start barking at each other. But, to get your at least some sense of release.
Yeah.
If you have nothing else to do in that moment, but make a phone call to somebody. A text is not going to be good enough, by the way. Don't
No.
bother texting.
and
Just no.
and it's potentially a record that could be preserved.
Yes. Just a phone call would be fine.
One other thought. There's also the pressure release valve that can go to our Creator Father as well.
No doubt.
And
That's right.
if you're willing to risk revealing that anger that He already knows you're dealing with, if you're willing to risk releasing it on Him, maybe that verse that Paul writes about casting your cares can take on a new meaning of what it might look like to trust the Father to deal with the creation that he's created. He gets it. He gets it.
Yep.
So as another potential outlet and a way to just deepen your intimacy, maybe take a risk on Father too.
And Moses is a great example of that. Not only, do I feel like I relate to him, want to not regulate anger well, I'll put it that way. Man, his prayer life, if you look at the conversations that are recorded in the first few books of the Bible with Moses and God, and if you look at them as prayers, total shift. And what you just said about not being concerned about can God handle my emotions that I'm expressing right now? Yeah, I'm pretty sure He can. And Moses just lets them fly.
That's right.
And at times, he and God are back and forth. It's beautiful. And if I can have that level of intimacy, you're probably right. Before I call my buddy for 5 minutes, I probably should, pray for 25 minutes. But whichever, do both. Have that develop that type of conversation with God that actually can be quite life-changing.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's good. I love the reframing of that conversation as prayer. Oh, wait,
ding, 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 ding.
That is what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing.
Right.
So I love that. I love that reframing. So we knew we wanted to jump into this topic, not fully knowing where it would go, but trusting that this as a instigation would get us to someplace good. And I think it's gotten us here. And guys, I don't know how you heard this conversation, but if you've made it this far, there's something in here that held your attention. There's something that you can relate to, or something that has prompted you with an idea or an action or something that you can do to move forward. And I'm gonna challenge you to take that step. I'm also going to invite you to let us know what that step is. I mentioned at the top, that our email address is feedback@thenextmanup.com. I'd love to hear what this conversation prompted in you as a step that you can grow. But whether you accept that invitation or not, the challenge is there. What can you do with the anger that you have or will have in such a way that it's about exercising self-awareness and self-control and finding a way for you to release when the pressure builds in a healthy way rather than a damaging way, so that maybe sometime down the road, probably long after we're gone, we don't need classes at the university level talking about angry males, regardless of color. We don't need those classes anymore because we've figured it out. That would be great. John, any last thoughts before we land the plane?
Well, let me just stir a pot and see who I can make angry here. As a SEC fan and you as a Big Ten fan, I just want to point out that Kansas is in the Big 12.
So we're inclusive. Is that what you're saying? Or like,
It's just a statement. You can draw from it whatever
do
you
with it
want.
what?
And if I just pissed off somebody who's listening, please send us a note and we'll try to regulate our anger.
There you go. There you go. Well, John, thank you as always. Fun, a little bit of a left field topic, but
Yeah.
I feel like we put the bat on the ball here with an issue that's relevant to all guys. So, guys, what are you going to do? That's the challenge for you. So, all right, let's put a ball on it. Same bat time, same bat channel next week. Until then, gentlemen, adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.